All right, just a quick FYI, guys. Tomorrow on Sunday, I know we normally do Invincible and then we do Green Lanterns. I'm going to take tomorrow off. Like, I just need a day to just relax and just kind of reorganize myself and get structured. I've been running myself ragged recently, so I'm kind of going nuts. But in any event, so we're covering Power Rangers here, right? We're recovering this whole thing. Thank you to you guys for not dumping spoilers, right? I really appreciate that because I'm going to tell you right now what's coming. Dude, the new Ranger who shows up, man, this guy is OP in the worst way. So here's the crazy thing. There is a little bit of a prelude to this. It's not overly important, so we're going to kind of like skim over that, right? But there is something that happens at the end of the prelude before we kind of get into everything else that is really important here. The whole idea is you have like the president of Italy who kind of talks about like Rita Repulsa, and we're not really worried about her, yada, 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 you know, she can't scare us, so on and so forth. And then she ends up unleashing like this giant monster on Italy. The Power Rangers respond. Jason kind of jumps in and does his thing. Zack ends up powering the Megazord in order to kind of save the day. There's a little bit of a frustration there in the sense that Jason got a little carried away with himself and almost got himself and the Prime Minister killed had the Zord not stepped in. The whole reason why that matters is because Rita actually ends up snatching up Zack and then bringing him directly to her headquarters, and it's kind of like, hey, look, had Jason not done what he done, then like, you know, everything would have been cool, but obviously he was trying to be a glory hound and all that kind of stuff, basically trying to turn Zack against Jason. The whole thing about this, and the reason why she's doing this, is because she's trying to get Zack to basically defect from the Rangers and join her group, right? Just kind of become an evil Power Ranger, more or less. Zack isn't really having it, and she's kind of teasing him with like the Dragonzord ring, right? That he has to cast aside his own powers, that he has to accept the Dragonzord ring. A lot of you guys are already familiar with this kind of stuff from, you know, years past with the Power Rangers. The important thing about all this is two things happen. One, Zack, of course, turns her down, which we would expect, right? And then Zack ultimately goes to Zordon, kind of explains everything that's going on, and he's like, you know, I was almost tempted, you know, yada, yada, yada. The last thing that happens, and the most important thing that happens, is that Rita talks about the idea of they're going to need a blank slate. They're going to need somebody who's a loner. Obviously, she was referring to Tommy Oliver. But in this moment, when she's talking to Goldar about all this stuff, a disembodied voice seemingly comes out of nowhere. And he basically says, like, this guy, Tommy's going to leave you, right? He's going to turn on you, and he's going to join the Power Rangers. And when Rita not knowing who this guy is, it's like, who in the world's saying this? Like, who's talking? Then he kind of responds, when you're truly ready to rule the earth, when you realize that I'm right, then you will see me. So that's an incredibly important thing, because that basically sets the stage for the first real encounter between this guy who owns the Black Dragon, and then in turn, the conflict between all the other Power Rangers, and this guy showing up on behalf of Rita Repulsa. And so picking up with the last video that we had, you basically end up having this guy kind of manifesting himself, right? Appearing against all the Rangers. And the funny thing about this is that what ends up happening here, the Rangers are kind of like, all right, guys, this guy's an enemy just like anybody else. Let's take care of him. He immediately blasts them, right? Just immediately blasts them. And it's almost like their skin's being torn off. And of course, they manage to recoup a little bit. But at the end of the day, they are crushed in no uncertain terms, right? There's nothing about this fight that indicates that the Power Rangers will come out on top, right? Let me make that clear. There's nothing here in this conflict that indicates that they even had a chance for success. These guys are readily destroyed. Not even in hell would you see a massacre like this. It's absolutely crushing. And so a couple things happen. One of the things that takes place here is this guy has a special interest in Tommy, which is really interesting, right? He's kind of like, you know, like you and I are going to go toe to toe at some point along the line. The other thing he does, he knocks out Billy the Blue Ranger and then tells Rita, wherever, you know, we're ready whenever you are. And of course, all the other Power Rangers are basically teleported to a kind of pocket dimension. And then in turn, Billy's taken away. And so the result of this is the big question they have here is, who is this guy, man? Like, this guy just dismantled us, like worse than the Green Ranger did when he first showed up, because the Green Ranger's better than all of us, because everybody knows that. Because the Green with Evil series, I kept saying Envy in the last video. I know it's Green with Evil, right? People were like, yeah, actually, Rob, it's Green with Evil. There's the name of the episode. I already know what it was, right? I just kept calling it Envy because I'm just used to saying Envy. But nonetheless, this is one of those things where they're like, yeah, you know, the Green Ranger's infinitely better than all of us because we suck compared to him, and he crushed us all, right? Like, it's absolute craziness. And so that's kind of the big issue is, one, as they're watching on a kind of view screen to sort of see what's happening, because obviously going back there would more or less be a death sentence, a few things are going on. One, Rita is actually kind of surprised by this guy and is like, I mean, I didn't really expect you to show up and like destroy the whole command center, but I mean, hey, you did your job. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. But then the other thing that Rita has is, if they escape to a pocket dimension, we can't follow them and we can't destroy them. And the response of this guy in the Black Dragon is, it doesn't matter. And so what he ends up doing is taking the Ranger coin, the power coin of the Blue Ranger, and then using it to basically basically tap into the Morphin grid using the green chaos crystal, and then literally cuts all the Power Rangers off to their power, right? They can't be Power Rangers anymore. The only exception is the Green Ranger, but like they all lost access to their abilities, man. This guy is crushing them all. Like it's amazing. See, here's the thing, man. I'm gonna you know what? I can admit things. I never took the Power Rangers comics seriously. I never cared about them. I was like, buy any more for Power Rangers. I mean, look, this show was amazing. It's one of the best shows in the history of the world. I don't care what anybody says, but how good could the comic possibly be? Man, let me tell you something. It's on a whole different level, son. son. I was not ready, right? So what you end up doing here is switching over to Billy. This is probably one of the coolest moments in this whole little story here. And the reason why is because what the comics do that the TV show just didn't do, more or less because of the nature of the show, right? It was designed to be like an entertaining kids show, more or less. So you can only get into deep philosophical ideas so long before like you lose the interest of kids. And at the end of the day, all we wanted to do was see them fight, right? Karate, like we thought it was the coolest thing ever. And so what you get is like some amazing development here with Goldar. And it's a cool thing because when Billy's basically taken to the dark dimension where Goldar's also being held captive, remember, Goldar failed to catch Tommy. And the punishment that he's enduring as a result of his failure is he's in the dark dimension. By all standards of measurement, he's been cast out of Rita's inner circle. She doesn't have any interest in him anymore. And that's one of the things that Billy kind of hits on. He's like, why are you here? And she basically says, because I failed to catch the Green Ranger and now I'm in my shackles as punishment. The Empress's punishment is just. Billy's like, but you failed a lot, man. Like you failed a lot. Like every time that you faced against us. So why is this any different? And that's why you kind of get this thing where even Goldar never really seemed to consider that. Like, why is this any different? But one of the things that Billy kind of says, like after some time's passed, he's like, are we not even really going to talk to each other at all? And Goldar's like, there's nothing to discuss. And that's when Billy kind of hits on this, that, like, I mean, we're both prisoners. So like at the very least, we have that in common. And that's one of the funny things that he kind of notices. He's like, but here's the thing, man. Like where I come from, the response is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And can you really call yourself an ally of Rita Repulsa, right? I mean, she's locked you away in here for failure, which seems to be worse given what you've done. You're not part of her inner circle anymore. She doesn't really care about you or have any interest in you anymore. Like, do you really believe she sees you in the same capacity that you see her? Like, you have this sworn loyalty to Rita Repulsa, and look where it landed you. Can you really say she's somebody worth following? This is a great conversation between these guys, because more often than not, Goldar in the old Power Rangers TV show was like, Goldar, I've got the mouth that doesn't really move. It just goes up and down. And like, yeah, Rita, we're going to get the Power Rangers, and, nonsensical statements and things like that. And it was interesting, for what it was. But seeing this conversation between these two characters is awesome because it basically reveals a side of Goldar that like we haven't really seen before. And so I love that whole conversation between the two. But nonetheless, kind of jumping back to everything that's going on, one of the big things that's taking place here is in a lot of ways, Tommy coming to grips with what's going on here. The Power Rangers, again, kind of losing their power is no small thing, or at least losing access to their power is no small thing. Zordon is nowhere to be found. Alpha 5 is gone, right? I mean, we end up knowing that he's more or less just kind of been torn to pieces. Like literally Rita Repulsa is holding his head in her hands and talking to him, and so it's kind of nuts. But nonetheless, all this is really Tommy kind of taking it on the shoulders and sort of almost coming to this belief that it all seems to, rest on his shoulders. That this all really seemed to kind of start with him, right? That he was the Power Ranger that Rita created. He defected. And since then, there's almost been this just kind of, unrelenting desire of Rita Repulsa to take out the Power Rangers more so than ever before. The other thing that goes on here, and this is a really cool moment, Rita Repulsa basically contacts the world. And she's like, okay, so here's the thing, right? Like I'm speaking in a language that regardless of where you are in the world, you will understand in your native language. I have basically taken out all the Power Rangers, right? Like they're gone, they're destroyed. And in their place, I have taken over their home. So like there's no Rangers to protect you. Not only that, she's also got control of all of their Zords. So she basically says like, here's what's gonna happen, right? To the presidents, the kings, the dictators, you have 24 hours to come to your senses. Any nation that does not pledge loyalty will become my enemy, and I will conquer you by force one way or another, right? Like I will take you out and I will rule this world. And there's literally almost nothing they can do to stop her. Now, the other big thing about this is because of the fact that Tommy is not cut off from the Morphin grid, and because of the fact that the power of the Green Ranger taps into the Morphin grid in a different capacity, this still allows him access to the Dragon Zord. So you end up getting Tommy and you get Jason, who basically bore the Dragon Zord with this idea of traveling directly to the moon to grab Billy, because Billy is seemingly the only one, because of his intelligence, the only one that can kind of get them back on track. I mean, when it comes to like in comparison to Billy, let's be honest with ourselves, the other Power Rangers are kind of idiots, right? But like everybody sort of has something to offer, right? Like Zack's kind of the cool guy sometimes, depending on the circumstances. He did have that cool little dance maneuver in like the intro in the show, which was kind of weird. Jason's of course the leader, and then Trini is, the one who's kind of working with Billy to become, more scientific or whatever it is. And then Kimberly's just like the one everybody wants to bang, right? So it's like, it's one of these things where it's like everybody kind of has their role to play when it comes to like all the different Power Rangers. But the cool thing about this is that you end up having Jason and Tommy who show up on the moon. And then in the middle of all that, you have Zack and Trini who are back in their little pocket dimension, and they're contacted by Alpha 5, right? Now, Alpha 5 is able to do this using like a backup system, so he's not completely out, but it's like having a power generator. Eventually, the battery will run out, and when it does, then Alpha 5's out of commission. And so the big question they have is like, what's going on out there, right? Like, what's the whole motivation behind all this stuff? Now, at that point, you jump back to Tommy and Jason, and the whole thing behind this is like, Tommy's basically gonna run in, right? As the only guy that really has any powers, it makes the most sense. Jason's powering the Dragon Zord, which is pretty awesome to see Jason controlling the Dragon Zord. It's cool. Like, if you were never a huge fan of Power Rangers, the significance of that's probably lost on you. But like for me, as a Power Rangers fan, like it's amazing, man. But in the middle of all that, you have like the Black Dragon who appears. And of course, one of the things that's kind of given to us here is this guy can alter his size, right? He can kind of shrink down to the size of what is essentially a regular Ranger, like a regular sized human being, or grow to the size of a Zord. And that's nuts, man, because this guy goes to like literally take on Jason with the Dragon Zord, and Jason's like, okay, let's do this. And then wham, he just gets knocked into space. He just gets sent flying into space, and that's it, right? And then at that point, the Black Dragon comes flying right down onto Tommy and is like, okay, let's take care of this, man. Like, let's get down to business. And that's one of the funny things is because Jason's able to recover, but the biggest problem is the Dragon Zord's just kind of flying out of control, right? So one is stabilizing it, and then two, trying to bring it back. The other thing that Tommy does here, and it's kind of a genius thing, Jason kind of hits at Tommy and saying, look, this guy's huge, right? He's enormous compared to you, which means he can't maneuver in the same capacity you can. So use that to your advantage. And so what Tommy ends up doing is literally grabbing like this massive energy cannon, which is one of the coolest things ever, and then fires it off at the Black Dragon. The problem here is it doesn't work. The Black Dragon just like catches the energy in his hands, and it's just like, was that it? Like, was that your big plan? Like, literally just like claps, right? And just shuts down the energy. And it's like, okay, so like what was the point of all this? Like, I mean, was that your idea? You're gonna be able to pick up a giant gun like your Rocket Raccoon and shoot me with it? No, man. That's not gonna happen. And so what you end up having is Tommy, who actually kind of starts playing a few games with this guy and says, like it says an awful lot that like you have to be 30 stories tall in order to defeat me. And so ultimately, like Black Dragon ends up shrinking down. And from Tommy's perspective, that's what he needs, right? He's like, I need this guy to be my height so I can take this guy on face to face and we can call it a day. And so now like he jumps in, he's like, you just made a big mistake. And before he can even finish the word, bam, like he's immediately taken out by this guy, right? And this guy actually goes in for the kill and then hesitates for a second. Now, this momentary hesitation is what gives Jason the ability to jump in and take this guy out, right? To basically, I mean, not really destroy him, but at the very least to like tear off a piece of his arm and then grab that and just teleport away. At this point, it's just fleeing for their lives, man. Like, I mean, obviously the mission is a total failure, right? Like, it's a complete failure. Aside from the arm they get back, that's basically it. There's not really a whole lot they can do here. And so there's this really cool conversation that sort of takes place between Rita and the Black Dragon. And one of the things that Rita noticed is that with this Black Dragon guy, he hesitated against Tommy. And that's one of the things she's kind of curious about, right? He kind of says like, I underestimated the Green Ranger. It won't happen again. And she's like, I don't understand why you can't like warp his powers away the way you did with the other Rangers. And that's when we kind of learned that like he accesses the Morphin grid in a different way, so it's not easily done, or it really doesn't seem to be able to be done at all. But one of the things that happens when it comes to this conversation about Tommy, he doesn't really answer the question of why it is that he didn't kill him when he had the chance. But then he kind of offers a bit of a reprieve and saying like, I want him to be 100% when I kill him. Honestly, that's no real measure of an answer at all, because it doesn't really give us any actual insight into why he's so interested in Tommy. All it really shows us is that he wants Tommy to be in at 100%, indicating that he wants Tommy to understand the full depths of his failure and how incredibly outclassed he really was. But outside of that, we don't really have an answer here. And so that's one of the things where you switch back over to all the other Rangers, and Tommy actually comes in with this great idea, right? And one of the things that he says is, okay, look, so when this guy took away all your powers, it's because he used a combination of his energy blast, basically, right, his plasma blast, along with the chaos crystal, and then in turn, channeling it directly into Billy's power coin, which basically allowed him to access the Morphin grid, which shut down all your powers. And so with Alpha 5 kind of operating and listening in behind the scenes, the question that Tommy poses here is, I wonder if we can do that with my power ring. If we use my power ring as this kind of conduit, because it doesn't tap into the Morphin grid and by traditional means, it's kind of a separate path, then does that mean I can give you guys my powers? And Alpha 5 is, kind of replies and says, yeah, hypothetically, that should work. The problem is it'll leave you powerless. And so at the end of the day, Tommy's like, small price to pay. This is huge, because in the last video that we talked about, one of the things that we discussed is that Tommy always saw himself as an outlier, right? Even when he was there among the Power Rangers, they didn't really see himself as one of the Power Rangers. He just happened to be with the Power Rangers. And by all standards of measurement, right? Like, he was one of them. Like, we look at him, his powers don't come from the Morphin grid in the exact same way, but at the end of the day, he's a Power Ranger, he's got a colored theme, he has a dragon, man! Like, I mean, this guy was essentially a Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, but because of his backstory, because of his history, his involvement with Rita Repulsa, all that kind of stuff, because by really his own nature, he's an outsider, he doesn't really fit in, that he never saw himself being one of them. This is one of those instances where those barriers start coming down, and Tommy's just kind of like, I am a Power Ranger, and if I'm going to be a Power Ranger, I have to think like a Power Ranger, I have to think like a teammate. And so he kind of says, okay, so like, we've got this guy's arm, let's basically use it to, develop one of his energy blasts, we'll fire it into my coin, which in turn will go to you guys, and you guys will basically gain my powers. And that's exactly what happens, right? Like, the crazy thing is when they all activate their whole thing, right? Like, Morphin time, and they do that whole Morphin time thing. I used to do that when I was a little kid, because I had a morpher when I was a little kid. It was one of the coolest things. But nonetheless, like, when that happens, like, ultimately, they all turn into Green Rangers, right? They're not really Dragon Rangers. They're all their normal Rangers as they are, right? Tyrannosaurus, Pterodactyl, Mastodon, Saber-tooth tiger, but they're all colored green. Basically, we have an entire army of Green Rangers here. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.